"Uncle, please, you are hurting me." Yugoma, who was a child, cried as her sister's husband continued abusing her. Life was a living hell for Yugoma. All this started when her mother died. She was 7 when she lost her mother. Yugoma was born into a family of 13. When her mother died, they had to split to different relations. Yugoma was the second to last born of the family. Some of her siblings had to go and live with their cousins, others went to stay with their auntie. Yugoma went to stay with her elder sister, who lives in a different state. When she went to her elder sister's house, everything was going well with her. Her elder sister's husband was not around when Yugoma came, he went on a business trip. But Yugoma's story changed when her elder sister's husband returned from his business trip. His name was Mr. Bernard. When Mr. Bernard came back home, everything changed for Yugoma. She started seeing hell. 3 days after Mr. Bernard arrived, something happened. Yugoma was outside playing around the house when her elder sister came to her and said, "Make sure you look after all those things I keep outside, and also don't forget to eat your food when you are hungry." Mrs. Felicia instructed and left for the market. Immediately when Yugoma's elder sister left for the market, Yugoma heard her name from inside the house. It looked like her sister's husband was calling her. So she quickly ran inside to meet him. "What are you doing outside?" Mr. Bernard asked. "Nothing," Yugoma answered in fear. Although Yugoma was only 7 years old, any little thing could scare her. Mr. Bernard drew her closer to himself and dipped his hands into her clothes. Yugoma was only a child, she never understood what her uncle was doing to her, she just stood in silence. She started feeling some pain around her while her uncle kept abusing her. Her uncle continued taking advantage of her till he got the satisfaction he was looking for. Yugoma didn't feel much pain that day, because Mr. Bernard didn't touch her deeply. But Yugoma knew in her mind that what her uncle was doing to her was not a good thing. Her uncle dressed her up and warned her never to tell anybody. Yugoma was afraid of her uncle, so she promised not to tell anybody about it. Even sometimes, she would try talking to her older sister, but she ignored her. That was how Yugoma's life changed for the worse. She kept growing up in pain. Mr. Bernard still didn't feel satisfied because his wife is always around the house. So he wasn't able to have sleep with Yugoma the way he wanted. Sometimes he would send his wife to different meetings just to make sure he slept with Yugoma. He opened a shop for his wife, so she will be staying at the shop at all times. He did this so that he would have enough time to spend with Yugoma. Her uncle further went to start sleeping with her. He sleeps with Yugoma every day. From 7 years old, she became 9 years old, and then she continued to face her uncle, who always abuses her. Her older sister is not around. When Yugoma was 12 years old, her uncle started sleeping with her directly. Mr. Bernard was never bothered by how the poor girl felt, but he was only concerned about his satisfaction. Yugoma never told her elder sister about what her husband was doing to her. She was afraid of what her uncle might do to her. Then, finally, Yugoma got pregnant at the age of 14. When she realized she was pregnant, she cried bitterly. Her whole life was beginning to threaten her. What happens when her auntie finds out that her junior sister is pregnant? Well, days came to pass, and Yugoma's elder sister finally found out that Yugoma was pregnant. When her elder sister knew about this, she beat the hell out of Yugoma, including Mr. Bernard. While Yugoma's sister was beating, Mr. Bernard was making some signs for Yugoma that she should never open her mouth to say he was responsible. If she ever tells anyone that he is responsible for the pregnancy, her name is sorry. Yugoma was afraid of Mr. Bernard. She didn't tell her auntie that it was her husband who got her pregnant. Mrs. Felicia suggested that Yugoma be returned to the village. But her husband never agreed with that. He suggested that Yugoma should take a DNC. After so much argument. So they finally agreed on that decision, and they took Yugoma for a DNC. It was such a painful experience for Yugoma that she cried her eyes out. After the DNC has been done, 2 days after the DNC was done, Mr. Bernard started sleeping Ugoma again. He sleeps with her all the time, like before. This time around, after sleeping with her, he would force her to take some drugs, some kind of tiny drug to take to prevent Ugoma from getting pregnant. These drugs were not friendly at all. After taking these drugs, Ugoma always felt unconscious, like she was not herself anymore. This drug kept on disturbing her. Sometimes she would be feeling very weak and sick. Then Mr. Bernard came up with a plan. He took Ugoma to the hospital. They inserted something into Ugoma's body, something she never knew about. Due to that thing that was inserted into her body, Ugoma started seeing her periods like 4 times in a month. That's strange. Ugoma's auntie was complaining about this. How can someone be seeing her period like 4 times in a month? Her elder sister became worried. Then she took Ugoma back to the hospital, and they removed the thing that was inserted into her body. After all this, Ugoma got infected with some kinds of infections, not sexually transmitted infections, but due to what was inserted into her body. They quickly treated the infection without wasting time. After some days, Mr. Bernard started sleeping with Ugoma again, and then Ugoma got pregnant the second time. He secretly took Ugoma for a DNC, which was so painful. After some time, Ugoma got pregnant for the 3rd time. Ugoma's life was just miserable. Her whole life was under Mr. Bernard's control. She doesn't even have time for herself. She was always abused by her uncle. To cut the whole thing short, Ugoma got pregnant like 7 times. Ugoma was 19 years old when she got pregnant for the 7th time. That was when her auntie finally found out again. Her auntie took her to the hospital for DNC again. Then she asked Ugoma who was responsible for the pregnancy. Although Mr. Bernard said Ugoma should never mention his name to anyone, she didn't know when it came out of her mouth. Immediately, she said it was Mr. Bernard, her husband. Ugoma thought her auntie would be shocked or surprised, but she was not. She only asked if Ugoma was telling the truth, and then she said Ugoma couldn't keep a child for now. Her elder sister told her that she still needed to get rid of this pregnancy because she was too young to keep a child. We have to remove this one. After this pregnancy, you may now start having your own kids, Mrs. Felicia said. That was all Mrs. Felicia could say. She wasn't even bothered about the fact that it was her husband who got her sister pregnant. Ugoma felt very bad. It looks like the whole world has failed her. How can she tell her elder sister that her husband was the one who got her pregnant and her elder sister wasn't even bothered? That was when she knew that her situation was getting worse. Everyone had failed her. Ugoma thought her problem would be solved after she told her auntie, but it continued to get worse. There was no place for her to run. Life was just upside down for her. She couldn't even keep friends. She had no boyfriend to help her. Because whenever her uncle sees her with any guys, her uncle will beat the hell out of her. So she couldn't keep friends at all. As time kept going, Ugoma began to wonder if her auntie was even aware of what her husband had been doing to her, because she wasn't bothered when Ugoma told her about it. A lot of thinking came through Ugoma's mind. That's not all. Ugoma's elder sister has about 4 kids. Ugoma will cook for the family, clean the house, and take her auntie's kid to school before she goes to her own school. In fact, there was a serious scarcity of water at the place where they stayed. Ugoma had to walk a very long distance just to get water to do the housework. Life wasn't an easy one for Ugoma. She was passing through a lot of pain. Sometimes when Ugoma's elder brother comes to visit her, Ugoma would also try talking to her brother about this issue, but he never gave her his listening. Ugoma was always getting sad and skinny due to her problems. Sometimes, when her siblings come to visit her, they would be asking her why she is not getting fat but skinny. As in, she is living with a rich family, so why is she getting skinny? Upon all the whole food you are eating, you are still skinny, her siblings would say. But eating food without a rest of mind is a waste of time. It wasn't about the food. Mentally, Ugoma was dying in pain. There was no one to help her. Different thoughts started coming to her mind, and finally she decided to run. Yugoma ran back to her father because her father was still alive. When she got to her father, he was surprised to see Yugoma. Yugoma tried to explain everything to her father, but he would not listen, although she didn't go straight to her point. Her father told Yugoma that she must go back to stay with her auntie. Yugoma stayed with her father for like 1 week. During her time staying with her dad, she decided to go visit another of her elder sisters who also lives in that state. When she got to her elder sister's house, she told her elder sister about everything that Mrs. Felicia's husband had been doing to her. But her elder sister never believed. She told Yugoma to shut up. Yugoma, you are lying. That is how you go about spoiling your uncle's name, ungrateful child, Yugoma's sister said. After sleeping around with different men, you are now saying it's your uncle, who had been sleeping with you, her sister replied. So after that day, Yugoma was taken back to her elder sister's house. And this time around, it got worse for Yugoma. The suffering continued. I can't really tell you everything that happened, but as time kept going, Yugoma grew into an adult. Yugoma received a lot of threats from her uncle and his family. She passed through a lot of pain for like 7 years. In fact, she was already getting used to all the maltreatment she was receiving. But one day she found this guy who loved her. His name was Prince. The guy was from a wealthy family, and he also loves Yugoma so much. They set a date for when he would come and visit Yugoma at her house. On that day, that was the first day he was coming to see Yugoma's family. Mr. Bernard was not in support of the relationship. In fact, he warned Prince never to come near his house or Yugoma ever again. So due to this, Yugoma couldn't have access to Prince like before. Like I said before, Prince was from a wealthy family. When Prince was leaving Nigeria to study abroad, he got Yugoma a cell phone so they could communicate with each other. But when Mr. Bernard got to know about it, he collected the cell phone, removed Yugoma's SIM card, and threw it away. So there was no way Yugoma could communicate with Prince, and her suffering continued. Some bad thoughts began to come to Yugoma's mind. This time around, Yugoma's decided to join some bad group of friends. Since everyone is not listening to me, I will do my own thing in my own way. This is what Yugoma said to herself. So she ran out of the house and went to a different state. In that place, Yugoma joined some bad friends, and there she began to live her life the way she wanted. She was living with her new friends, and they were doing what they liked and wanted, dating different guys. So Yugoma got pregnant. When she discovered she was pregnant, she said to herself that she was going to keep this child. She's not going to get rid of it. I have had a lot of it already, so I will be keeping this child, Yugoma said. So when Yugoma gave birth to her child, when the child was about 3 years old, Yugoma went out to get something from the market. There was this big hotel close to where Yugoma was passing. And there she finally found this missing one. She saw the love of her life, Prince. Prince was right there at the hotel with his friends, and that is how the Yugoma story changed for the better. Currently, Yugoma is married to Prince, and they have 3 kids of their own.